Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Weave Intelligence interview. I'm joined today by Clark Polo, who is the Director of Engineering Platform at Demonware, which is a studio within Activision Blizzard that's actually responsible for all of you nerds that like to do online gaming over the weekend. That wouldn't be possible without Clark's team. Clark, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And maybe actually let's start there because you were just telling me this offline and I thought it was super interesting because I had no idea. So Activision is actually a collection of studios, and Demonware, the one that you work for, is in charge of the online gaming sort of platform. And then you come together with other studios to deliver the end product, the end game.
Correct. Yeah. So Activision, as people know it, big publisher for some of the biggest games, in particular Call of Duty. I think a lot of people have heard of Call of Duty. It's
Oh yeah.
what really kind of took off the shooter genre and the multiplayer space, and it just really did blow up. And now you see things like Fortnite and all these other big players. But Call of Duty has always been a constant in that area. But for Call of Duty to continuously grow and be where it is, it takes a lot of people and a lot of creativity and a lot of just effort from across the board. So Activision, part of Activision, there's a lot of studios that report up to Activision. Beanox, Raven, Treyarch, Infinity Ward, and each studio has responsibilities like, motion capture, uh,
Right.
perhaps like designing the maps and gameplay. And my particular studio, Demonware, is in charge of the online services. So, when you see things like multiplayer, Warzone, all that good stuff, it's that's that layer. Yeah.
The fun stuff. I
The
love it.
fun stuff, yeah.
And so how, so here we talk a lot about, platform engineering, and, cloud infrastructure. Is how different is it when your users are literally like hundreds of millions of gamers hitting your systems in real time? What is the, what are some of the hardest infrastructure problems that are unique to online gaming?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenges we've had is very unpredictable. Like
Mm,
we can have a lot of past data that can infer to a forecast that says we may expect X amount of traffic for this new game, and then the launch will come out and it might be a lot bigger than that or a lot less. And how that impacts platform and the infrastructure side of things is we have to continuously test and ensure that our infrastructure, our platform can sustain that huge traffic. So if we get that wrong, the forecasting that leads to load testing that leads to actual building of the platform that then creates the services that allows people to play, if we don't get the capacity and all those things right, um, you start seeing a lot of things break. And yeah, so that for me is one of the biggest challenges. But luckily over the years, Demonware has become so good at contingencies because of
mm,
a lot of the a lot of the incidents we've occurred in the past. It just allows us to be a lot more contingent on scenarios that could happen. So we have a very rigorous DDoS mitigation system. People are constantly trying to attack these games, and we're talking about
really?
hackers.
Is it that often?
um
Yeah.
oh yes, yes, hackers are constantly trying to get into the game and try to cheat and all that stuff. So DDoS is a distributed denial of service. You just get a lot of people trying to um, just
Hit the system, right?
send as
Bam,
many
bam.
requests as possible, so the service itself will go down because there's too many requests being handled at once. So when you have something like that, you have to have a very rigorous like DDoS mitigation strategy, which we have, and that's proven to work out very well. But obviously there are things like, what do you do if your cert manager just can't handle more load, and that's where all your
Right.
traffic flows. you know?
Right.
So there's those scenarios where you're like, okay, did we think about that? Did we think about this? And it's always that 80-20 rule. If you plan 80%, the 20% execution should be the easy part. But you have to
Mm.
try to plan and learn from your past events and all that good stuff. So I would just say, yeah, that I know it's very long-winded, but that for us, it's just our biggest challenge is to know what we don't know, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess like that's super interesting. First of all, like I'm just curious, like why are people trying to DDoS you? Like, is it because like there is like sort of like in-game, currencies or equivalents that then they can translate back to money in the real world, or is it just like I want more points, better ranking?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say the motivation of some of these folks. It's um, a lot of time, honestly, is just to try to bring the game down. like
Right, just
like
just
some
for funds.
just the malicious action of like, hey, let's DDoS this game, and you see it
Right.
sometimes on websites. Sometimes websites, big websites go down because they don't have proper DDoS mitigation, and it will just completely cripple their services. So yeah, the it's definitely malicious intent, but it could definitely varies. In gaming, I think it's more to just shut it down for some campaign or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm just curious as a follow up on what you said. So, and I guess like we're already getting into the AI land here. I was hoping we would hold on for a bit longer, but like how much because obviously you're saying you've been learning from past things that have happened, right? Like how much of this is kind of like deterministically codified now versus like how much are you trying to leverage like new agentic stuff, new AI like way of detecting this type of things, and just like you know I guess like responding more in real time and more on the fly versus like, no, no, we kind of already seen these patterns. This is what you do in this case.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, uh, I I'm relatively fresh in Demonware. I would say, even though I've been there for over 3 years now, there's people who have been there for decades. So
Hmm.
when you have that tenureship, there is like that sense of, we know what we're doing. This is just, let's not let's not mess with the formula. And I agree with that, right? So if we're successful and we're doing things great and things are, customers are being served, the demand for new features and new games and new services, that doesn't stop. So,
Hmm.
the question really becomes, do we actually have the luxury to go back and re-architect and add on new features if it's still working because we have this other stuff that we have to deliver. So it kind of becomes like a discussion about, yes, on one hand, we want to be forward moving and we want to implement a lot of these things that we think are industry defining, like AI, agentic architecture, and all that good stuff. But there's also that balance of just making sure we deliver the game, quite frankly. So, but
Right.
there are areas where, in platform in particular, that I'm pushing a lot for things like an IDP, right? Like IDP is for me has been kind of like the drum I've been beating for a while now. Is like we need an IDP, we need an IDP, and for those of you who don't know, an IDP is an internal developer portal that basically is just a one-stop shop for like here's all the services, ownership applied to scorecards, applied to your organization. And it may seem very simple, like a service catalog. Cool. Why is that a big deal? The time to information of things, it is a lot of time and toil that is required. You got to meet with people, you got to talk with people, you got to look through documents, you got to remember conversations, and sometimes time to information is just grueling. So
Hmm.
an IDP really helps. Like if you just need information, it's all there. Now, just kind of tying this back to AI, I think AI, IDP and AI, I don't know what that looks like in the future, but I think the fusion of them is probably a really big part of platform engineering because platform engineering really, if you think about it, it's to allow developers to develop faster,
Hmm.
safer, more reliable. And that requires a lot of data. If you have the data, you can make deterministic decisions based on that data. If you don't have the data, then you're guessing. So
Right.
you have to have the data that infers how your organization is doing in order for you to make the right choices. So that's really kind of the where the rubber meets the road is, do you have the data? And if you don't have the data, then you have to start collecting that data, get your baseline,
Right.
and then start looking at historical samples and, you know, iterate that data. So what I did was, it was really hard for me to describe to people what an IDP actually is. So what I actually did was, I vibe coded using Claude, um, my own IDP. I was like, why not? I think this would be the easiest way for people to
That's
see.
awesome.
Yeah,
Nice.
just to like for people to see like the actual value. So I don't know if
Mhm.
I can share my screen. Is that
I think
okay?
you can.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So this data is not. Oh, can you see my screen by the way?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So this data is not like real. This is like
Real.
a
Right.
demo, but
Hmm.
this is what an IDP that I vibe coded using Claude. And but you can see what I was talking about. You have your departments, you have your domains within those departments, the teams, but really the nuts and bolts is here, right? Your services, and then your, who owns it, the health of the service, which is determined by the scorecard, so you can have your production readiness, launch readiness, all that good stuff, your KPIs. So, like, what are your door metrics, your melt? So, going into the metrics, like, how do you know if you're doing well if you don't know what your metrics are, right? Uh, so this is kind of like the point is like, get your metrics so we can make the right decisions. But then, you start trickling into things like, how do we improve our incident management features? How do we look at, major launch shifts? And how do we look at all these things that kind of just come together and say this is actually the company, right? This is how we do things. So I'm really advocating for an IDP at this point because I truly believe it unlocks a lot of potential for decision making. Now, how AI can tie into that is, I don't expect people to look through this and understand all the ins and outs and all the data.
Hmm.
But if you have an AI that can look through the data and look at anomalies and look at all these things and create just very quick summaries about what's going on, I do think there's a lot of power in that, because you start eliminating the need for manual toil to go through all this, and then you have an AI assistant or agent to go through that for you. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so much that I want to unpack. And super cool that you share that. So I guess like, one thing that we talk a lot about in the community is, and so first of all, like I agree with you, like portals are an essential part of platform engineering, right? Like you need to have that kind of just like one-stop shop, single pane of glass where you just like get an understanding and an alignment, frankly, across teams as well as within the platform engineering team itself. We're like, hey, this is what we're playing with, right? Like these are the different moving parts. Um, but obviously, I guess like one way of looking at the portal is just like it's really just like an interface at the end of the day, right? Like the key systemic competitive advantage that you need to build as a platform team is actually the layer below, right? So like to your point is like the data. So where does the data come from? And so like I guess like maybe just to start, there's so many things you said that I would like to unpack, but like just to start there, like what is the how do you think about the data, right? Like how do you think about where the data comes from? How do you think about, ETL? How do you think about, sort of like standardizing that backend, right? Because the demo can be impressive, right? With Claude, and it is actually the other thing that we're seeing right now that I think is really interesting is a broader trend in the enterprise. It's very easy to spin up things that look great, right? And like very impressive, kind of like day zero demos. But how do you take it to day 100 actual like in production operations, right? You need this like proper backend that it's rooted in, right? So how do you think about that part?
Yeah, you're 1,000% right. If you don't have the proper underlying systems that infer the interface, the IDP, then it doesn't matter. It just looks pretty, has all
Yeah.
the bells and whistles, but it doesn't really inform anything useful. So you're
Right.
absolutely right. It must be a source of truth. And in order for it to be a source of truth, the underlying data must be accurate. So an IDP, can have a lot of APIs. Like shout out to Cortex. I've been talking to them, but Cortex, you know, they have an IDP that looks very similar, and they have a ton of APIs that connect to Jira, that connect to ServiceNow, that connect to wherever. So you have to ask, all those connections that it's connecting to, are those accurate? Because a lot of times what I'll see is we'll start connecting things and then you'll start seeing inconsistencies in data. And then you got to go deeper and start unpacking all those inconsistencies, because the reality of it is you could have a very beautiful interface and you can have an awesome AI assistant, but if the AI assistant is hallucinating because it's getting bad data, it doesn't matter. So
Right.
for me, data is
They
real.
might hallucinate even with good data. So if you then
Actually,
compound it
yeah.
with like, yeah,
Fair enough. Fair enough. And but to be honest, it is the data. It really lies in the data. How does our world move forward? Do we just guess about, oh, we shouldn't, don't answer that now. I know the world's not a great state, but like, let's just look at, the market, right? The NASDAQ or, whatever. It's all data, you know, it's all data. Companies run based on data. How well are we doing? Did we do well last quarter, last year, last decade? I don't know. And let's compare it to how we're doing now. And let's just understand what are the signals that we need to focus on that makes us better, more
right,
efficient, whatever the
right,
case is. And
right,
honestly, and platform engineering is all about that. How do we make things easier? How do we make things more efficient? How do we make things faster, but safer at the same time? I
exactly.
always say platform engineering is analogous to a road. If you have your developer that's driving a really nice car, pick your poison. I'll pick a Porsche. And if doesn't
Nice.
matter how fast the Porsche is, if the road is full of debris, if it's full of
Yeah,
potholes, it doesn't matter. The car could be beautiful, but it's not going to get to its destination faster because the road is just it's just not
yeah,
good, right?
yeah,
So as a platform engineering team, we must ensure the road is clear so the
right,
car can get there quickly. Now you can start saying the nuances of, yeah, but what if a lot of cars are driving, and then you start introducing things like stoplights, stop
right.
signs. You start introducing, lanes. You start introducing
Multiple
maybe an
lanes. Yeah.
express lane. And then you have maybe your police who are your SREs who kind of make
Yeah.
sure everyone's kept in check, right? Like, I can go on and on with this analogy, but you kind of see the point is we have to
I like
ensure
it. It
that
was not the first time I heard it, but it's the first time I've heard it
yeah,
taking it that far.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So for me, it really is about, is your data good? Do you have a good way to interface with that data?
Yeah.
And do you have good, competent leaders to make good decisions based off that data?
Yeah. And is that a lot of what you're focusing on then is like actually, getting that data, cleaning up that data, ensuring there is, you can apply, for example, RBC, like the right level of like permissions, as different users and increasingly as new types of users, right? Access this data because I think that's also what's like really interesting. If we think about like now as a platform team, you no longer just serve application developers, right? To your point, we need more lanes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you start adding like agents as users, now you need like 100 million more lanes basically in the same road, right?
Hmm.
And so are you, are you doing that work? Is it a data infrastructure team doing that work? Are you collaborating? Is this all sitting under one roof? Do you hate each other? Do you love each other?
I'd say love-hate relationship for sure. But no, no. Joking aside, we work very closely together, like me and the other directors and the other departments and teams. I call those honestly like artificial boundaries, to be honest, because
Mhm.
a lot of people pay
Right,
attention to the boundaries versus the problems.
right.
And I'm like, if we remove this boundary and we focus on the problem, I think we can move a lot faster. So I really try to remove those boundaries as much as possible. Obviously, those
Mm,
boundaries are there for a reason, and you have to respect that. But when it comes to problem solving, that's a common problem that a whole company can get behind. For me, that's really all of us are in this together. So,
mm,
I may reach out to the data team. We have some really great data analysts that, if we have like, hey, how can we get this specific data that seems to be relevant to this decision that we're trying to make? We'll work together and just find that data, right? It's like we have data bricks and data lakes and all these things that can help us, just try to make sense of the data. But really, it's if you have a lake of data, how do you make sense of it in a way that can actually make a change?
Right. Right. You said another thing that I thought was really interesting, right? Like you're sort of like juggling um right this like, hey, I want to keep building against my platform product roadmap essentially, right? But then, hey, I need to like maintain the system for like whatever, like millions of players, and like and so like how do you how do you strike that balance, right? Because obviously I think one of the things that we see a lot in the community and broadly in the market is platform engineering teams struggle with finding a balance because, on the one hand, a lot of times, platform engineering teams have been born out of DevOps teams, essentially, or pre-existing cloud infra teams, and so they used to have this responsibility of just like basically maintaining the entire thing, right? And now they're being tasked with like, okay, well, you still need to maintain the entire thing, but now you also need to build a platform, and you're supposed to actually, by the way, know exactly what it means and platform as a product and all that good stuff. Um, so how do you think about that tension? And is it about having like different people wearing different hats? Is it about actually, creating artificial boundaries to your point, or, how do you solve for that?
Yeah, that's a tough problem to solve because it really is a central problem that we all talk about all the time. We want to do cool stuff, but we have
Right.
to make sure we keep the business going, which
Yeah.
is the right thing to do. Um, so, it's easy to look at work as just one bucket of work, just a lot of work, and then engineers to do that work. But if you don't categorize the work properly, you'll never understand where the energy of those engineers are actually being focused on.
Hmm.
So going back to data, yeah, I don't know if you can tell I'm a very data-driven guy. um, if we look at the bucket of work, what are the categories that we can label this type of work? So therefore, we can understand where we're putting our energy in. So there is this idea of KTLO, or keeping the lights on, and a lot of people call it different things. It's called KTLO, it's called technical operations. Now we've
Hmm.
evolved it to tech ops. Um, some people call it just operations, whatever your flavor is. But that work is essentially that, keeping the business going, keeping the lights on. That may include maintenances, it may include upgrades, it may include incidents that have occurred that you have to jump in there and fix things. It may include, just whatever. Um, Now that has had a bad rap because uh, it's become synonymous with non-value add work.
Hmm.
But how
Right.
are you
Right.
saying that keeping your business running is not valuable?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You know what I
Oh, and by
mean?
the way, you're just a cost center.
Exactly. So that type of mindset is what, like, for me, it needs to be revisited, because I think that mindset is what's
Mm.
actually making people just analysis paralysis. I don't want my
Right.
team working on tech ops or KTLO. I want them working on feature development, cool stuff. So it's now has all of a sudden become engineers saying, why am I working on tech ops or KTLO stuff in
Right.
operations versus, like, so it starts becoming a conversation about, I don't even want to do that type of work, even though that work is super important. So
Mm.
we need to reframe the conversation. Keeping the lights on for your business is very valuable. It's a core part
Yeah.
of your role. So it's a non-negotiable, and it must be held to that same standard of feature development and all those things. So once you start categorizing the work properly, so let's just say you have a category for development work, you have a category for KTLO work, you have a category for tech debt, like just getting rid of tech debt and sustainability. Then you start understanding, oh, okay, if we start categorizing the type of work, we can start seeing where our engineers are spending their most time in. And once you start reflecting on that data, you can start realizing that, oh, we actually don't spend that much time on sustainability or
Mm.
investment work that makes our lives easier. We're
Mm.
growing our KTLO work, but we're not investing time to make it easier for ourselves.
Right.
So how do we identify work that's in the tech ops space or the KTLO space that can be optimized? that we can invest, let's say, a couple sprints in for these SREs to focus on and automate those things, thus saving the time, which equates to some number of FTE. So you can see how data really does trickle to decision making, and this is no exception to that.
I love that. And is it about then also trying to figure out a balance per FTE, I guess, of like, hey, you need to do like 30% KTLO and like, you know, and then you get to have the sweets basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. When I came in for one of the teams, there was no notion of KTLO. It was just work.
Right.
And then I saw the team and they just looked like they were drowning. And
Right.
I'm like, what is happening? So I set out the mission. I'm like, we're going to start measuring KTLO. People were like, why? Why are you measuring? Like, just listen. Let's just do it. Let's see where it
Yeah.
goes. We found out that that team was 80, 80 to 90% KTLO driven.
Wow.
That is not healthy.
Yeah.
No wonder why the team feels miserable because they're
Right.
working on KTLO all the time. They're
All
not
the
working
time.
on other feature development stuff that they really frankly want to do. So what do? You look at the KTLO and you start saying, okay, how can we reduce this? After a couple months of just measuring and understanding, we were able to reduce it down to 40%. And then that rest of the percentage was able to be focused on other areas. Now the team is in a much healthier place. But without
Nice.
that data, there's no way you can reach to that conclusion. You just say, well, let's just hire more people. Well, let's just
Right.
do what we're doing.
And keep
But
drowning.
I tell people it's rarely a headcount issue. Sometimes, yes, of course it is, but a lot of times it's just if I gave you 5 more people, you're going to be in the same problem next year because you haven't fixed the way you actually
You
work.
haven't fixed the problem.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's really how I like to think about these things and how I like to relate data to it. Without data, you cannot solve a problem fully. You can only patch it in areas that you think will fix it indefinitely, but most likely it will not.
Yeah. Super interesting. Okay. I want to go back to another thing that you said at the beginning, which is this kind of like structure that's quite peculiar to Activision, right? Or I guess maybe to just like game studios in general. The fact that you have this like different studios and each one is sort of like focused on specific things, and then you all have to come together. So that sounds like a typical challenge actually of platform engineering, right? Which is essentially like, how do you think about, and so how do you think about, providing this kind of like platform layer across essentially all these different products, all the different services and different studios? Because I would imagine also from an internal development perspective, obviously you want developers, you want these game designers, right, to have creativity, to have freedom, right? But still obviously move, to your point, within the right guardrails so that they can move faster without breaking things. So how do you think about that? And is there anything, I guess, different about this type of setup that versus like a regular, I guess, enterprise where there's more of kind of like of one monolithic engineer organizations with like a few teams within it, but it's not necessarily. It almost feels like here it's almost like multiple organizations essentially like collaborating into one end product, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's a good question. I don't think I've thought about that too deeply, to be quite honest with you. And Luca, I'm terribly sorry, but I do have another meeting that I have to jump into. I had 30 minutes allocated to this, but
Oh,
I would love to just continue like more conversations if we can, because there's just so much in this space that I really feel like needs to be out there. And to your
yeah.
particular point, I will say patterns are everywhere, right? Like
Mhm.
if you can see the patterns, you can understand what drives the patterns from an underlying perspective. So all studios, regardless if they're working on motion capturing or online services or gameplay or map building, they all have specific patterns that either make their lives easier or harder. Some of those
Right.
patterns do relate directly to a platform. Now, I haven't really seen uh, a unifying platform for all studios,
Mhm.
but that's a great idea. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me noodle on that one for a
Yeah,
bit.
you
Yeah,
you did all that. Let me just close with one last question, maybe.
yeah.
Um, And I guess like what is just random, and it can be like a super quick thing, like, but I'm so curious, like, because I think you have like such a particular background, in gaming, and we don't get to, we get to talk to a lot of like really regulated industries. That's like normally what like platform engineering is like applies, like, insurance and banking and
Mm.
government, and it's like gaming is so much more fun. It's like I keep wanting to talk to that. Like, what's
Yeah.
a scaling problem that only the gaming industry has to deal with?
Yeah. So if we think about platform
Mm-hmm.
in the infrastructure sense, usually companies are very traditional. If they have their own private data center, or if they have a public cloud provider like AWS, GCP, Azure, it's pretty much like pretty set, right? Like you have your data center, it runs, cool. Capacity, your applications go there. Public cloud, same thing. Infrastructure runs your apps, set, cool. Um, with on the gaming side, it's not quite as simple
Mm,
because every every year we have classic titles, plus we have new titles, plus we have the titles that are still ongoing. So we just have a catalog of titles that are constantly being on 24/7.
right.
So if you have all these titles that must be on 24/7, how are you able to upgrade and improve the architecture of your data center if you cannot go down, right?
Exactly.
So that's a very tricky place to be. How do you handle things like DR? That is like the scale and the capacity just continues to fluctuate all the time. That's where it comes in very different because when you're right, when it does come to traffic, I mean, we receive petabytes of data all the time. And we receive millions and millions of customers hitting our services every second.
Every second.
And if if we hit a million sessions and they all hit great, but that one session hit a streamer that happens to be streaming live for 1,000 people and they're like, hey, Call of Duty went down. Like that's
Yeah,
already,
yeah, yeah.
so it's a very like, yes, we want to be perfect, but we also know the reality is there's no such thing as 100%
Right,
SLO, right?
right,
It's how many nines can you keep up? So
right.
so for us, it's just that balance of yes, scale is there, but we have to balance private data center with public cloud, and we have something called dedicated servers that serve our players that run in all over the world. And so it's just managing that infrastructure at a whole different level on a global scale, I think is quite different from like a traditional, uh, just, business that just has the platform. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Clark, thank you so much for your time, man. This was super interesting, and I really hope we get to talk more and double click on more gaming stuff. I'm very passionate, so
that's
this
good.
is
Yeah, I would
this
love
has
to
been fun.
continue these conversations. And I was telling you earlier, I don't feel like enough of these happen. Like we all just kind of get into our tunnel vision and we kind of just focus in our own thing and we all think we're right, right? We all think we got the formula down, or maybe, some of us like me, I never think I have the formula right. I'm always
Right.
thinking, man, there's something I could be doing better. So just having these conversations, be open to other ideas, you know, I think it's a really great thing that, what you guys are doing. So thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Well, Clark, thank you so much, and see you around. See you the next one.